As discussed in Part 1 of The Illusion of the ego is a mental construct that arises when consciousness identifies with the mind's contents, creating the illusion of a separate, independent self.
It emerges from the natural functioning of the mind, which categorizes, labels, and interprets experience in terms of a personal identity. The ego is maintained by the constant recycling of thoughts, memories, and self-narratives, which create the impression of a continuous, solid entity that persists through time.
However, the ego is not a real, permanent, or independent entity, but rather a temporary appearance within the larger context of pure awareness. It works by obscuring our true nature as the undivided awareness, leading to a sense of separation, lack, and the need to constantly seek fulfillment in external things.
By recognizing the illusory nature of the ego and resting in the stillness of pure awareness, one can begin to disidentify from the ego and realize their true nature.
Question: what is the ego's source of thoughts and beliefs?
The ego is the part of the mind that identifies with thoughts, beliefs, memories, and experiences, creating a sense of I or me that feels distinct from the rest of existence. But where do all these thoughts and beliefs come from? Are they the individual's own thoughts and beliefs? Furthermore, everyone is convinced that their name is them and wants children with the same name.
This is an excellent question and points to the deeper nature of thoughts, beliefs, and the sense of personal identity. The individual thoughts, beliefs, memories, and experiences that the ego identifies with are not truly personal or individual in the way we commonly think. The contents of the mind, all the thoughts, beliefs, memories, etc., arise from the same universal source, which is consciousness or awareness itself. They are expressions of the infinite potential of consciousness, taking form as apparently individual minds. However, the specific content of each mind is largely shaped by impersonal factors, the conditioning of culture, language, family, education, and all the experiences one has been exposed to. These factors shape the patterns of thought and belief that arise in each mind, giving the impression of a unique personal identity. But when looked at more deeply, these patterns are seen to be largely inherited and conditioned, not the creations of a separate individual. This is why there can be such striking similarities in the thoughts, beliefs, and experiences of people who share a similar cultural background, even though each person feels like these are their own unique personal attributes. The belief in the personal name as being one's true identity is a prime example of this. The name, which is given by others and reinforced through social convention, becomes a strong anchor for the sense of separate identity. The ego attaches to this name and builds a sense of continuity and solidity around it. The desire to pass on this name to children is a way the ego tries to extend its sense of identity and importance beyond the span of the individual life. It's a way of seeking a kind of symbolic immortality. However, the name is just another thought, another mental construct that the ego identifies with. It is not the true essence of what we are. So while the thoughts, beliefs, and experiences that make up the ego's sense of identity feel very personal and individual, they are actually the result of largely impersonal, conditioned processes. Seeing this can help loosen the grip of identification with the contents of the mind and open the way to realizing our deeper nature as the unconditioned awareness in which all these contents arise.
Question: disorientation and lack of goals. After one realizes that there is really no self, it feels like being disoriented with no goals.
The sense of disorientation and lack of goals that can arise with the realization of selflessness is a very common experience. When we've spent our entire lives believing in and operating from the sense of being a certain character in our minds, the absence of this familiar reference point can leave us feeling adrift and purposeless. The ego is very much invested in goals, plans, and the idea of a personal narrative unfolding through time. It derives its sense of meaning and importance from the pursuit and achievement of these goals. So when the ego's reality is seen through, it can indeed feel like life loses its direction and purpose. However, this is where the perspective of the path of knowledge invites a profound shift in our understanding of life and action. It suggests that the true source of meaning and purpose does not lie in the ego's goals and plans, but in the unfolding of life itself. When we let go of the ego's agenda and rest in the openness of our true nature, we find that life continues to move and express itself naturally. We still engage in activities, pursue interests, and respond to the needs of the moment, but without the overlay of a separate self trying to control and direct the process. In this way of being, action arises spontaneously from the present moment, without the need for a separate planner or controller. Life itself becomes the guiding force, and we learn to trust its inherent wisdom and intelligence. This is not to say that we become passive or inert. On the contrary, the realization that the self is an illusion can lead to a more authentic, engaged way of living. But our actions are no longer driven by the ego's fear-based need for control and validation. Instead, they flow from a place of openness, compassion, and attunement to the whole. So, while the absence of ego-driven goals can initially feel disorienting, it is ultimately an invitation to align with a deeper purpose, the purpose of life itself, expressing and exploring its infinite potential through the unique form that we are. This is a profound shift in perspective, and it can take time to adjust to this new way of being. But as we learn to trust the natural unfolding of life and to act from a place of open, responsive awareness, we may find a sense of meaning and purpose that is far more profound and satisfying than anything the ego could provide.
Question: restlessness and seeking, after realizing that there is no permanent self, that the self we thought we were was just thoughts, opinions, and memories, it feels like there is no need for being restless and seeking thrills in new experiences.
You've captured a key insight that often emerges with the realization of selflessness. The constant seeking of new experiences, the restlessness and thrill-seeking that is so common in our culture, is largely driven by the ego's inherent sense of lack and incompleteness. The ego, believing itself to be a separate entity, this small person in our heads, is always looking for something outside itself to fulfill its needs and desires. It seeks pleasure, excitement, validation, and distraction in the endless variety of experiences that life offers. This can lead to a constant sense of restlessness, a feeling that there's always something more to be had, some new experience that will finally satisfy the ego's longing. However, when the illusion of the separate self is seen through, this compulsive seeking can naturally fall away. When we realize that we are not the limited, isolated entity that we thought we were, but rather the open, unlimited awareness in which all experiences arise, the need to constantly seek fulfillment outside ourselves diminishes. This doesn't mean that we no longer engage with or enjoy the experiences of life, but the desperate, driven quality of the seeking is replaced by a more relaxed, open, and appreciative way of being. We can enjoy experiences as they arise, but without the sense that our happiness or completeness depends on them. In the absence of the ego's constant seeking, we may find a profound sense of contentment and peace in the simple presence of the moment. The ordinary experiences of life, the play of light and shadow, the sound of the wind, the feeling of the breath, can reveal themselves as miraculous and sufficient. This is not a dull or passive state, but a vibrant, intimate engagement with the richness of life as it is. It's a way of being that is grounded in the recognition of our inherent wholeness and completeness, rather than the ego's sense of lack and need. So while the letting go of the ego's restless seeking can be disorienting at first, it is ultimately a doorway to a more profound and satisfying way of living. It allows us to embrace the fullness of the present moment, without the need to constantly chase after new experiences to fill a perceived void. It is a way of being that is grounded in the peace, openness, and inherent completeness of our true nature.
Question: endless seeking. It's an endless seeking for more, with nothing ever being enough.
You've hit upon a fundamental characteristic of the ego's mode of operation. The ego, by its very nature, is always seeking more, never satisfied with what is. This endless seeking arises from the ego's deep-seated belief in its own incompleteness and insufficiency. The ego is essentially a sense of lack, a feeling of being separate and disconnected from the wholeness of life. From this perspective of separation, the ego is always looking for something to fill its perceived emptiness. However, this is a futile endeavor. No matter how many experiences the ego accumulates, no matter how many goals it achieves, the sense of lack persists. Each new acquisition or achievement provides only a fleeting sense of satisfaction before the seeking begins again. It's like trying to fill a bottomless hole. No amount of external things can ever be enough to satisfy the ego's inherent sense of incompleteness. This endless cycle of seeking and dissatisfaction is the ego's fundamental dilemma. It is a consequence of the ego's misperception of itself as separate and incomplete. As long as we identify with the ego, we are bound to this cycle of seeking without ever finding true fulfillment. The path of knowledge and self-inquiry suggests that the solution to this dilemma lies not in finding the right things to satisfy the ego, but in seeing through the illusion of the ego itself. When we realize that we are not the separate, insufficient self that we thought we were, but rather the open, complete awareness in which all experiences arise, the compulsive seeking can naturally fall away. In the recognition of our true nature, we find the completeness and sufficiency that the ego was always seeking but could never find. We realize that we are always already whole, always already connected to the fullness of life. In this realization, the endless seeking for more is revealed as unnecessary and illusory.
Question: greed and ego insecurity. So greed for money is based on ego insecurity?
Absolutely. The ego's insecurity and sense of lack is often at the root of the greed for money and material possessions. From the ego's perspective, money represents security, power, status, and a means to satisfy its endless desires. The pursuit of money becomes a way for the ego to try to fill its perceived emptiness and to assert its sense of self-importance. The ego, feeling inherently insufficient and separate, looks to external things like money to provide a sense of completeness and validation. It believes that if it can just acquire enough wealth, it will finally feel secure, respected, and fulfilled. This drives a compulsive pursuit of money, often at the cost of other values and relationships. However, this pursuit is ultimately misguided. No amount of money can truly satisfy the ego's deep-seated sense of lack, because the lack is not a material one but an existential one. It stems from the ego's misperception of itself as separate and incomplete. Even when the ego achieves financial success, the insecurity remains. There is always the fear of losing what has been gained, always the sense that more is needed. The ego's hunger is insatiable because it is trying to fill a spiritual void with material things. This is where the path of knowledge offers a radical shift. It suggests that true security and fulfillment cannot be found in external things like money, but only in the recognition of our true nature. When we realize that we are not the separate, insufficient ego, but rather the open, complete awareness in which all experiences arise, the compulsive pursuit of money can naturally lose its grip. The ego is a mental construct that creates the illusion of a separate self. This illusion is maintained by the mind's constant recycling of thoughts, memories, and self-stories. However, when we look closely, we find that there is no actual separate self experiencing this illusion. The sense of personal identity is itself a product of thought, not a fundamental reality. This realization is a profound shift in understanding, and it's not always easy. It requires a willingness to question our assumptions, to look deeply into the nature of our experience, and to let go of long-held beliefs about who and what we are.
Created by Elias Desinos. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe.